Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome and thank you all for joining us today here in the Walter Hall Rotunda at Ohio University, and also thank those who are joining us via live webcast across the country for being with us today. I'm John Molinaro, President of Appalachian Partnership Incorporated. The partnership and its two subsidiaries, APEG and Appalachian Growth Capital, work across the Appalachian counties of Ohio to bring enduring, widely shared economic prosperity through private sector business development. We help local communities and their entrepreneurs rebuild economies ravaged by boom and bust cycles of extractive industries and 40 years of offshoring of American manufacturing. Much of our work focuses on building industries that capture more of the wealth derived from our region's farms, forests, and natural resources, and to recirculate that wealth in the regional economy, building local prosperity. We're delighted to co-sponsor today's session of America's Rural Opportunity. This is the 8th session of the series and the first to be held outside of Washington, D.C. Before we begin our session today, I'd like to share a bit about the Rural Development Innovation Group that has worked with Aspen to develop America's Rural Opportunity series. We're a group of seasoned practitioners, intermediaries, and funders deeply engaged in rural economic development across the United States. We began meeting in 2016, well before our surprising national election brought a new urgency to discussions about how to improve rural economies. Our aim is to lift up a rural opportunity agenda by surfacing and sharing innovative approaches to strengthen rural economies, families, and communities, to increase understanding about what is working and why, to accelerate and spread creative and proven approaches to more rural places, and to help public and philanthropic organizations understand how to more effectively invest in rural America to achieve enduring and robust outcomes. Today's session of America's Rural Opportunity focuses on building enterprise and ownership in a regional food economy. I mentioned earlier that much of my organization's work focuses on supporting businesses that capture more of the wealth derived from our region's farms, forests, and natural resources, and recirculating that wealth in the region. I'd been working in rural economic development for more than 3 decades before I moved to Athens County in 2012 to help start the partnership. During those decades, Southeast Ohio came up over and over again as one of the preeminent examples in America for how to develop a vibrant regional food economy. The Athens Farmers Market, organizations like AceNet and Rural Action, and businesses like Shagbark Mills, Jackie O's Brew Pub, Snowville Creamery, Casa Nueva, and Milo's Whole World Gourmet are legendary among those trying to build local and regional food systems across America. Across most of the nation, organizers of regional food systems talk with pride about sourcing their food within their state or within 100 miles. Here in Athens, Ohio, we talk about the 30-mile meal as if there's nothing particularly special to being able to meet nearly all of our dietary requirements from local, fresh, healthy foods. We walk daily among legends of the local foods movement and seldom realize how extraordinarily fortunate we are here in the Southeast Ohio region. All this didn't happen by chance. It took a tremendous amount of cooperation and networking, dedicated leaders, and courageous farmers and entrepreneurs who were willing to risk everything to pursue a vision of better food delivered in a way that returned more wealth to local communities. I'm sure that neighbors looked with deep skepticism at the first local farmers that invested money they really couldn't afford to lose to build hoop houses and create a new growing season to deliver fresh lettuce to their customers year-round. But they persisted, and the whole region has benefited as a result. It also isn't just an Athens thing. 30-mile circle covers a lot of territory. That's about 1.8 million acres. And it takes that much territory to provide the diversity of local food products we enjoy here. It takes the Ohio River Bottom farms in Meigs and Gallia County that grow so much corn, beans, and produce, It takes the Amish farms and the Chester Hill product auction of Morgan County to supply produce, fruit, eggs, and meats. It takes the pasture sprinkled among the hills and the hollows all across the region to produce organic dairy products and grass-fed beef. And it also takes a whole lot of infrastructure and coordination to reliably produce a 30-mile meal, deliver it to local consumers, and process and package it for sales both here and beyond the region. There are so many outstanding contributors to the region's amazing local foods movement that it simply isn't possible to feature them all in today's event. In fact, one of our panelists, Leslie Schaller, organizes multi-day workshops to help other regions learn from what's been built here. So instead of going wide and introducing you to more of the important contributors to the local food economy, we're going to go deep and give you a sample of just 3 whose stories illustrate the broader narrative. So with this introduction, I'll turn it over to Janet Topolsky, Executive Director of the Aspen Institute Community Strategies Group, to cover logistics and introduce our moderator.
Good morning, or good afternoon. Actually, good afternoon to the people in this room. Good morning to everyone who is watching us live stream and is west of the Eastern Time Zone, which is everyone watching the live stream just about. I'm Janet Topolsky. I'm Executive Director of the Community Strategies Group at the Aspen Institute, which we call CSG for short. And Aspen CSG, our work is to connect, motivate, and equip local leaders and local doers who are trying to improve the prosperity of communities across the United States and advance people who are living on the economic margins at the same time. Since 1985, when Aspen CSG was founded as a program at the Institute, we have done most of our work in rural America. And so we partner with the Northern Forest Center, which is headquartered in New Hampshire, to coordinate and organize the Rural Development Innovation Group as well as the America's Rural Opportunity Series. As John mentioned, this is the 8th in our series, and this year the Rural Development Innovation Group got together and said, let's do some of these on the road. And so here we are in the one true Athens, right? This is the one true Athens. And we know there's one in Tennessee, and we hear there's one in Greece, but we know this is the real one. So as John said, this series is really trying to lift up what's working in rural America to improve prosperity, as well as what government, federal, state, and local, and philanthropy can do to better invest so that more of this happens. Before we dive in, I do want to do the logistics of thanking the funders of the America's Rural Opportunity Series, and those include the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities, the Lohr Foundation, the Northwest Area Foundation, the Mary Reynolds Babcock Foundation, the Encourage Community Foundation in Wisconsin, the N.E. Casey Foundation, the Northern Forest Center, and Aspen CSG, as well as all the Rural Development Innovation Group members. I want to mention to you that for those of you, especially on live stream, if you want to know more about our speakers, just Google America's Rural Opportunity and go to today's event, and you'll find bios for everyone who is going to be speaking. If you want to share your thoughts on today's discussion, and we really want you to do that and to send us questions, use hashtag Rural Innovation, hashtag Rural Innovation, all one word. And to learn more, get updates, you can go to the America's Rural Opportunity webpage or follow us on Twitter @Rural Innovators. So let's get started. The way our session will run is that our moderator is going to cue up the opening stories from each of our panelists here to present in turn, and then he'll ask them some of his deep, probing, provocative questions, or not, depending on, whatever occurs to him, he will ask. And then we're going to have a good block of time at the end for people in the room as well as people who are watching the live stream to ask us questions. So if you're in the room, I'll run around to you with a microphone. Keep thinking of those questions throughout. Same thing if you're watching live stream. Anytime during the whole event, just use hashtag Rural Innovation and we will receive your question and it will be run to me and we'll ask you. So now to really get started, I want to introduce David Brooks, who's going to be moderating today's panel. Now, if you read a lot of news or watch it on TV, you likely know who David Brooks is, but just in case you haven't, I'm not going to read his whole resume, which out of college I think started with covering the police beat in Chicago. Was that it, David? Which is pretty interesting, but I didn't know that till today. But his recent regular gigs have been as an op-ed columnist for the New York Times and also as a commentator on PBS NewsHour and NPR's All Things Considered, as well as Meet the Press. And, he really spends a lot of time commenting on politics, on culture, and on all kinds of social science. He's the author of 3 books, including some on the New York Times bestseller list. But I'm most happy to say that David is now a colleague of ours at the Aspen Institute, where he this very year, launched a new effort called Weave, the Social Fabric Project. Weave is concerned with the rise of distrust and isolation and alienation in our country. And what they are out to find in the Weave Project is to find people who are building community with their lives, finding people who really make community building what they do, not just in their work, but in their life, and to celebrate them, identify the values that move them, and to help them forge bonds that are going to support and encourage more community building in our country. Now, there may be those of you in this room in the live stream who sort of think of David Rooks as a city slicker. And I just want to counter that, because last weekend he was deep in a canyon in Hill Country, Texas, where there were no cell signals. Monday he was in Northfield, Minnesota, St. Olaf College. Let's hear it for the choir. Yesterday he was in somewhere in Ontario. He couldn't remember. Well, I'm sure you remember the name of the town, but he got up at 4 a.m., so we couldn't think of it today. And we know he has rural north central Nebraska in his near future, where, among other things, he's going to be speaking at the McCook Rotary Club luncheon. I said that, David, so that you will now get invitations from every Rotary Club in the United States. So today we welcome him to rural America of Athens County, Ohio. David, I turn the conversation over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. It's a great pleasure to be here. This is the first time I've ever been a part of a panel discussion where we ate the subject of the discussion before we talked about it. So thank you for the food. I'm going to ask an initial question just to introduce you, each of us. I should introduce you first before we do that. So first we have Leslie Schaller, who is a restaurateur and I would say a social entrepreneur and community builder around food networking, but you will describe what you do. We have Art Oestreich, who owns Jackie O's Brewery, probably well known to everybody in this room, and also the Bagel Street Deli, so a local proprietor. And then Sean Terrell, who works at Hocking College, doing some of their workforce development and community engagement. So all people involved in the community of food, the food community in this area. And so just to introduce each of you quickly to the crowd, if you could describe in a minute or two how you got to this area.
Sure. So I'm an alum of Ohio University. I came here in 1971 and did my undergrad and grad degrees here, really preparing myself for a job as an entrepreneur and an economic development provider. I have degrees in art and English and philosophy. But I think it served me well. One of the things that really fascinated me when I moved to the region was I visited the Athens Farmers Market in the summer of 1972. And that really was an entry point for me to get a sense of these rolling foothills of southeastern Ohio, to get off campus, to get out beyond the city limits, and to really get that sense of place. And I have found over all these years that this is just where I feel the world and the work that I do calls to me, is really being fixed in this place in southeastern Ohio.
Yeah, I came to Ohio University in Athens, Ohio in 1994 to, can you hear me? Yeah, to study a multitude of things. 4 pieces of paper later, I studied Russian and history and education, fell in love with this area, had to go find a job upon graduating though, and I taught overseas for 2.5 years in South Korea. But within 6 months of getting there, I kind of knew that I was going to come back to this wonderful little community, because it is a community. I grew up in Cleveland area, and I love where I'm from, and I love my roots, and I'm sure I'm wearing Cleveland gear on me somewhere. But this is more of that community and that feel where you know everybody. I know most of you in this room, and it's really wonderful. And so that's what brought me here.
Well, specifically a 2013 Chevy Cruze brought me here this morning. And really, no matter how I got here, just being here today, looking out, as we tell our stories, a lot of the things we do on a daily basis involve almost everybody in this room. And so to be up here and to be with you all and to have David Brooks introduce me, it doesn't get any better than that. My wife and I and our son moved here 4 years ago. We moved from Atlanta. My wife was offered a job in Columbus. In Atlanta, I was a music educator. I taught orchestra at an inner city school in Atlanta. And prior to that, I was an aspiring trumpet player. I spent about 4 years playing in a touring musical. And we moved to Columbus for my wife's job, and I sort of gravitated into arts nonprofit administration. And through networking and just getting out and meeting people, I met Dr. Betty Young, who was the newly installed president at Hocking College. She was a visionary. She was a fireball of energy. And we had the opportunity to talk about her vision for the college and really her vision of how the college was going to fit into the overall economic development strategies in this region. And an opportunity came up, and I took it, and I started as a project manager there, moved into the dean's position in November, and you know, just because when I came to Hocking, I'd never worked in higher education, nor had I really worked in community development. I had the opportunity to study people like Leslie and Art and Jen Simon and John Glazer, and these folks who are just tirelessly, selflessly dedicated to the work that's being done here, and you know, it became a passion of mine.
Can I ask you, were you a music major in college?
I was a trumpet performance major.
So we have philosophy, languages?
Education, languages, linguistics.
Okay. That's just a shout out for the humanities and liberal arts.
Yes. Yes.
We need more community builders, and emotional intelligence is a good resource if you want to do that. So I live about 10 blocks from the U.S. Capitol building, and attention focuses on that building regularly, especially today. But one of the things that has become clear to those of us at Weave is that the most important thing happening in America is things like this. And so I just want to reiterate, it's such a good pleasure to be here where things are really happening and not where things are not happening, where I live. So let's start with Leslie. Let's just set the context, especially for people watching online. Define this community, especially the area you've surrounding us. What is the nature of the economy here, and what's the basic story of this place?
Boy, our story is very diverse. I mean, if you look at where we're at right here at Ohio University's campus, you know, the first educational institution started in 1804 in Ohio. So this was really opening up of the West. And I think what's particularly special about the region is that we've retained a lot of those, what I would consider sacred assets of place. You know, there's still a strong connection to our agriculture, to the many types of, I would say, natural assets that we've had. Certainly we've gone through a lot of boom and bust industry in terms of our history here. But southeastern Ohio and certainly Athens County, I would say, as an area where we've had two educational institutions, Ohio University and Hocking College, really lay out a footprint of what is possible in the region. So historically, we have a lot of entrenched poverty in the region. I don't want to, you know, not underscore some of the challenges that we have. But I think if you look at some of the innovations, some of the community building that has been happening, certainly in my experience over the last 4 or 5 decades, we've really looked at what is unique, what is superior in many ways, I think, to the opportunities that people have in the region. And that's their resilience, their sense of maybe a more bootstrapped entrepreneurial opportunity, and we make things happen. So, you know, David, to your comments earlier, you know, we're working at the pace of rural development. And I think what that means is that we have both a true appreciation of the people and the places where this work is happening, how people have historically come together and solved problems together. So that's what really sets us apart.
If you tell people what the economic future of a place is going to be, they're going to say Silicon Valley or something. And if you mention ag to them, they might think, well, that was the 19th century. But you've got a vision of ag as an economic driver in the 21st century. Explain that to us.
I think, you know, for many of us, and there's a lot of food and farm entrepreneurs out here in the audience. I know there's many probably out in live stream TV land as well, listening to us today. I think it's a new vision to not necessarily say, okay, ag is going to come back in the same way that it happened in the region 20, 30, 50, 100 years ago. It's looking at more complex, what we like to refer to as value chain structures. So still thinking about supply chain, the relationship between buyers and sellers, but doing it in a way that wealth and resiliency sticks within the region. So deepening that reciprocity between the growers, the processors, the marketers, the distributors, the retailers. You know, I've been in the restaurant business for many decades now, and I think one of the things that we tried to figure out when we started our worker-owned restaurant back in 1985 is how can we make a difference in our community? How do we lift the economic opportunities of our farmers, maybe some of our local bakeries? How do we make choices every day, financial choices that really positively impact others in our community? And then how do we do it in a way that's deeply networked, that is always approaching a pathway to learning and to a shared vision? So I think that's what sets us apart.
So you've got a restaurant, but you've also got something called a food hub.
Correct.
And food hub was not something, to me, that was like the food court at the mall was a food hub. But like, what is a food hub?
So the organization I also work for, the Appalachian Center for Economic Networks, or ACENET, we started opening business incubators back in 1991. And because we had these deep relationships with farmers and a lot of food entrepreneurs, people who had maybe been making extraordinary things in their home kitchen but couldn't sell them in a commercial level. Again, you know, food safety is important, folks. We have to make sure that we're not poisoning anyone. So even though there's this, you know, rich understanding, I would say, of how to preserve and prepare foods, having a licensed facility to do that in really makes more opportunities for those processors or even farmers wanting to extend the season. You know, we have a great entrepreneur here for the last 20 years, really taking one of our forgotten assets, the pawpaw. Have you ever had a pawpaw, David? Okay, great. So, you know, we just celebrated our 20th anniversary of the Pawpaw Festival. Well, a lot of the pawpaw processing, whether it's pawpaw beer or pawpaw popsicles, wouldn't happen without shared use facilities. So ACENET started the Food Ventures Center back in 1996. I think we were the third facility in the U.S. to open such a model. We're still going strong, and in recent years we've expanded another 20,000 square feet and another business incubator in the city of Nelsonville. And that's kind of our food hub. But we're trying to get away from some of that jargon. So I'm calling all these facilities now food and farm enterprise centers, because not only are we incubating new businesses, we're also allowing a lot of businesses to expand, especially when it comes to regional distribution. John mentioned Snowville Creamery earlier. They have their own processing facility in Meigs County. They employ a number of people, great living wage jobs, benefits, and they continue to grow. But they also partner with ACENET. They might rent storage or use one of our facilities as a distribution hub. So these facilities are kind of unique and kind of complicated, but that's the shorthand.
So I've got a friend who grew up in Arizona, and he was involved in some weird scientist who was going to harvest energy from UFOs in space. And the guy wired him up with electrodes, and he had a weird dream. And the weird dream was that he would grow up to become a very successful artist, and he would buy a big warehouse, and he'd put 40 artists in the warehouse. And that actually came true. He became a very successful artist. He bought a big warehouse, and now when you go to his warehouse called Ironworks, there are just a lot of different rooms with different artists. Is that what? your
Yeah, and I
facilities?
think these models can translate in a lot of different ways. I mean, now we understand something like that maybe as a maker space or an artisan incubator. Again, it's how do we leverage our resources? How do we take what's available in our communities, but work together in a more deeply with deeper reciprocity, so that each individual entrepreneur, each farmer, there's no way that they're going to build their own FDA licensed processing facility on their farm, but they could come for multiple weeks at the end of the harvest season to AceNet and make all sorts of applesauce and strawberry jam.
Describe what the atmosphere of a day looks like. Is there like ice cream socials, or like are they actually intertwining over coffee or whatever?
Oh, yeah, we eat really well. So there's always food being made. In the Food Ventures Center, which is about 12,000 square feet, there's typically about 80 businesses using that facility. Now, some of those folks are there 2, 3, 4 days a week doing processing, doing bakery products. Certainly, we're on trend in Athens County with the food truck movement, so we have a lot of caterers and food truck operators. But all these folks are in different places within the building, a central kitchen where they might be elbow to elbow. We run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's jumping. And we really outgrew it a number of years ago. So we're developing our Nelsonville Business Incubator to be a hub where more of the processing, packaging, labeling, storage, warehousing, and distribution can happen.
Now, one of the things I'm learning with this Weave project is that everybody has good intentions, but it's rare to find somebody who can actually build a system that
Yes.
inhabits those good intentions. And I suppose nationally, most of us in mainstream food consumption, there's a national system. You go to Safeway, you go to Walmart, whatever, and the restaurants go to whatever the big national suppliers. You had to build an entirely counter system.
Correct.
So what were the several things you did to build that counter system?
Well, and I think the challenge is, in some ways, it feels like we're operating in a local food system, which is in this parallel universe to our global food supply system. I think what we've had to learn over the years is really how to dig deep into the food safety, the product development, expertise that needed to be really harnessed, working with a lot of our local to our federal inspectors, really becoming, for us, advocates to the work that we're doing has been essential. The other piece, and again, we talk a lot about this in terms of brands, is how do we catch the attention of our local customers? So a number of years ago, AceNet and the Athens County Convention and Visitors Bureau started a regional brand program called the 30-Mile Meal. And this was, again, a way to motivate a number of buyers. They might be institutions like universities or healthcare providers. They might be the locally owned restaurant that just needed that gentle push to buy more local. But that systems approach is really important. And I think that's where AceNet is key with our partners like Rural Action or even some of the other business incubators, the Innovation Center here at Ohio University, to help entrepreneurs navigate that systems approach. Because this won't work, I think, solely on the backs of entrepreneurs. We have to have support organizations. We have to have oftentimes the political capital at the table to make this stuff move.
And you have ways to measure the impact, this growth of the local economy or local farm economy? Are there ways to measure?
Oh, yes. I mean, I am this, as anyone out in TV land knows, I'm like this incredible wonky metrics gal. So I think, we can't believe sort of our own BS, as I often say. Can I say that on live TV? But I think
Worse is being said right
now. Yes, exactly. There's no bleeping here. So I think the challenge for us is we want to create measures that not only we internally as our partners can see if we're succeeding. Are we creating success? Are we creating the social, the economic, the political impacts that we want to see? So we will use a framework called Wealth Creations, or the WealthWorks framework. And stay tuned if you want to have some all-day trainings. I just was at Berea College last week doing 2 days of helping other folks, other community builders, many of them working in multiple sectors, food and farm, energy, creative placemaking, also figure out what their metrics should be, because we want to know whether we're really legitimately making a difference.
And then just finally, talk about the social impact on the community. Do you get a sense that you've created not only economic opportunity but social connections? Can you give us an example of two people who are now besties because they happen to make together?
Well, one of the things that I find so fascinating, and maybe it's that little bit of that background in the creative arts, is looking at how many of the food and farm folks have now worked with some of our artists or artisans. So graphic designers, like if you look at any of the craft beer that Jackie O's produces, you see this incredible eye-grabbing artwork. So we've had a lot of graphic designers, Red Tail Design, which is also incubated on Athens campus, does a lot of different merchandising materials, web design, and oftentimes in these shared facilities, it's not just ACENET staff kind of doing this brokering, it's people are in a network, they're together, they're learning from one another, and they start to figure out how they can collaborate more effectively. So I love this confluence between our natural assets, our social assets, and the build assets that we're trying to develop over time, whether it's shared infrastructure, whether it's processing businesses graduating from maybe one of ACENET's facilities, but then creating another facility that they might share with other entrepreneurs. And Art will tell you some amazing stories about that as well,
Okay.
David.
Well, let's turn to Art. You started a company. Was that a childhood dream, or did that just happen?
Well, so my father was an entrepreneur my whole life, construction, Cleveland area, and so I grew up with a sanding pole in my hand for a lot of summers, and learned the ropes through life. I mean, when you're an entrepreneur, it's a 24/7 sort of thing, and that was something I never wanted to do. Yeah, I hope you're laughing with me, not at me. So entrepreneurialism kind of smacked me in the face. Like I said, I was in South Korea teaching English and wanted to come back to this place, and a business that I worked in as an undergrad was for sale, and was kind of hemmed and hawed for a while, and pulled the trigger. Again, wanted to come back here and wanted to continue my education through linguistics for a variety of reasons, and Bagel Street Deli, great friends of mine and I bought that and started really running with entrepreneurialism. We wanted to buy a bar, and next thing you know, my great friend Brad Clark said, "Hey, this brew pub is for sale. You should buy it." And in the quickest deal to date, we bought that little brew pub at 24 West Union in late 2005, and kind of went at it. But I did not necessarily think that entrepreneurialism was in my wheelhouse as a youngster.
So when you did the bagel thing, did you do a lot of numbers and running the numbers and figuring out what revenue you would need, or do you just go, let's try?
We ran some numbers, but we also knew, if you don't have a product consistently every day, you're not going to get business. And so we knew that, having worked there, that that place sells a lot of turkey. Okay, so don't run out of turkey. Okay, was a pretty valid thing. But of course, I'm a very numbers-driven person who never did any courses in mathematics or engineering or business. But I've been driven by numbers probably through my father's push way back when.
Okay, so let's talk about Jackie O. It's apparently not actually named after Jackie Onassis.
That's right. A lot of people on the East Coast and those in Boston really like the name of Jackie O's Pub and Brewery, or Jackie O's Brewery. When we bought the brew pub in 2005, early 06, my mother was diagnosed with cancer, and she moved to this Cleveland in 67 from England. And, obviously my mother, a big part of my life and all that sort of thing. So unfortunately, a very healthy woman. She passed away in June of 06. To lung cancer, and again, I could really use that grandmother figure in my life right now, but with a 10-month-old, and I told her on Mother's Day we're going to name this thing Jackie O's Pub and Brewery, and she said, a bar? I was like, it's going to be more than that, Mom, but yes. So yeah, that's where that comes from.
Now, describe how you built an atmosphere of the place. I mean, brew pubs really are community centers these days.
Absolutely. There's a lot of bars out there, okay? And what a brewery does something different. A restaurant does something different. And in 2006, we were the only, or 5, 6, we were the only brew pub in the area, and we really tried to clean up the atmosphere and the feel. We went to non-smoking within the bar's walls before the state mandated so, and that really helped turn it from an underage bar into something that was more adult-friendly, I'll put it that way. And live music, live entertainment, local foods when feasible and possible, and really trying to cater to your community. If you cater to your community is going to cater back to you. And so that's really been at the forefront of the whole thing. I mean, scratching neighbors' backs and things like that, that's at the core of who I am, and I think what the business has become from those 5 employees way back when.
Yeah, now describe a relationship with some of your suppliers, like some of the farmers or other artisans that are around here.
You know, from baking our own bread to buying meat locally sourced or that's been touched in a local sense, or buying tomatoes and fruit for our barrel aging program or for our sour programs in the basement. Really just trying to keep money in the area. I don't know if that answered the question, but to buying honey, maple syrup, to all the fruit that goes, again, into the barrel aging program. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite work today in our bigger production situations with the fruit, but when we do buy fruit, we buy it from certified, great production facilities. So they're coming out of Oregon Fruit, where it's aseptically done so that we can use it in production and cans not explode in someone's backpack, and things like that. But really trying to make wise decisions, and if we can't buy it in Athens or Ohio or the U.S., then we're kind of reinventing and looking to see where we can spend those dollars to keep them as close as we can.
And does that have financial cost?
Absolutely. All over the place. It's difficult to buy local. It's difficult to source local. It's difficult to do anything local like that. But you have to try, and you have to work with your friends and neighbors and community to try to get there. I mean, there's somebody in the audience right now who all of our spent grains, and we're talking trucks and trucks of spent grains, go to help serve as 20% feed supplement to a gentleman's cattle out in the area. And then, excuse me, we have butchers who are buying that grain, or buying that beef from that farmer to then supply and have a local, you know, maybe it's a 70-mile program there, but that's a pretty cool network, using a waste stream to help feed animals to then turn into keeping more business within the area.
So you've said there's some financial cost. There's obviously quite a lot of effort it takes, but because you do it because of your commitment.
Yep.
Do you think your other people in your line of work are going to do that, take that effort, or? And I'm really asking: is this going to spread to become the normal way of doing business, or is it going to be a subcategory?
The idea of just talking about those spent grains, that concept is happening all over the place, because I, the brewer, need to get rid of those grains and put them somewhere. So why put them in the landfill when they can be of use to someone out there? You know, that's a great question, David, and I would like to think that I'm trying to be a trendsetter in this realm and show people the way to do things through different work on different committees and being public about the things that we do. You know, there's 298 solar panels on our roof on our new build, which is not a cheap endeavor. You know, we worked with U.S. Department of Ag to get some grant money to help fund those things, but that's something we're very public about, that 50% of our energy usage in 2017 was generated by those panels and things like that. And I think the more that you put out that information, the better example you can set for your peers.
Now there's men and women sitting at the bar most evenings. Do they care about this stuff?
I think they do. I think they do.
Got a lot of loyal customers out here.
That's right.
What are we doing here in this room?
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. We can go.
Yeah.
And I gave Cliff some beer. It's floating around.
Right. But I think, one thing to note, though, is, yes, Art and Jackie O's has been an innovator, but now we do have other craft breweries that have opened since Art has expanded his operation. And he shares so much and supports
Do you know how
them.
nice it is now to be able to call somebody who's a mile and a half
I
away
know,
in case you
exactly.
need something? It's a
Right.
lot better to be able to do that.
And I was
than to-
actually trying to hire him, or at least bring him on to one of our advisory boards for one of our programs this morning as we prepared for this. So.
Right.
Let me ask you one final question, then move on to Sean. You had a fire.
Yeah.
Describe that process and that.
Horrible. November of 14, we had a fire that kind of took out 5-6 buildings. Not, we were kind of on the fringes of that, but we lost our main production kitchen, our main kitchen in the restaurant for 20 months or something. So we had to reinvent and move back. We started that 24, that little tiny brew pub, and then expanded into the building next door in 2009. So that facility, David had a much bigger kitchen, and we moved into that kitchen thinking we would never go back to the tiny one at 24 West Union. So after that fire, though, we had to reinvent and do things to get food back on the table. And that original room, we never really thought it would be a 7-day-a-week venture again, but it quickly turned into that. Had to lay off 35 people overnight. All the front of house staff and the servers and bartenders who were in that room, and a lot of the kitchen staff. It was a horrible, horrible situation. And we'd used AceNet in the past, okay, and for here and there a machine broke, and I'm a pretty independent person, so I was like to be able to do those things on my own. But with that fire, we have an amazing bakery team, and without AceNet, and we moved into AceNet for 18 months or so, and without AceNet, the bake staff would not be here, and with the build out, we got better. So we've now got a dedicated bakery prep space in the back of our kitchen, so that they've moved into a better home now that we got time to plan and work around what they needed that they didn't really have in the past. So
Okay. Let's move to Sean. Tell us about Hocking College. What makes it distinct?
Well, for one thing, we're on the cusp of our 50th year anniversary as a huge asset to the communities in Appalachia, Southeast Ohio. We educate annually, average 3,500 students in over 50 associate degree and certificate programs. I think what makes us unique specifically is the diversity of our programs. We have a very robust and dynamic natural resources school. We have a very diverse and dynamic culinary arts school. We also offer arts, business, and science. I think, another thing that makes us unique, especially now, and I mentioned her before, is our leader, and that's Dr. Betty Young. The college has been in existence for 50 years. We went through about a 7-year period where we didn't create any programs, and for a technical college and a community college, it's important to stay relevant, and it's important to stay on the cutting edge in order to meet the needs of employers and industry and the rapidly changing economy. And so for 7 years, we didn't have a new program. In the past year, we've created 14 new programs. Thanks. I didn't do it by myself, but yeah, I'll take the applause. And I think, too, with some additional folks who have joined the leadership team, they're really sort of revolutionizing the way that technical colleges and community colleges engage with the students and engage with the greater community.
So tell us, describe the programs. Where's the workforce headed? What are the things you now have to train people for?
So we work with the state of Ohio pretty aggressively. There's an arm of the state called Jobs Ohio that really collects a lot of data on which jobs are in demand and the skills that are needed for those jobs. And so in terms of workforce development, and I guess the nuts and bolts, how we traditionally think of workforce development, we look a lot at that list we talked to a lot of our industries in the region. I was trying to get Art to join our fermentation science advisory board, because every single one of our programs are governed by an advisory board. These are industry leaders who hopefully will eventually hire our students. But they are really, they're fundamental in curriculum development and making sure that programs stay relevant and the students are leaving with the skills they need. So it's kind of an all of the above strategy.
You've given me an excellent phrase when I'm going out with my buddies and my wife asks me where I'm going. I'm going to say fermentation science. Just doing research. So how about the food workforce? How do you interact with the food system workforce?
So we have a culinary arts program. It's a 2-year associate of business in culinary arts, 2-year associate of baking in culinary arts. We also have a hotel restaurant management program. I think that's one way. We're preparing chefs. We're preparing folks to work in the hotel restaurant management business. Leslie talked a couple of times and mentioned the importance of food safety. We offer certificate programs like Serve Safe and the shorter term programs that prepare people to how to safely serve food, which is important. All of us want to make sure our food is served safely. And so I think those are the big ways. We also try to integrate and get our students in front of businesses that Leslie and her folks work with quite a bit. And then we just started this firm. I'm going to talk about it a lot, only because Art's sitting right next to me. This fermentation science program, which is it's a fermentation. It's a 2-year fermentation science program, but it's a stackable program, stackable certificate program. Students can choose between a craft beer certificate, a wine certificate, viticulture certificate, distilled spirits, and culinary fermentation. And it really blends aspects of business, learning how to run a business, the science of fermentation, learn how to make product, and then there's some agroecology thrown in there, how to source local products or even how to grow local products. And so I think that's another way we're servicing the local food sector.
Now, a lot of community technical schools, all colleges have troubles with completion. That, a lot of the students there, some of them are older, some of them, they have family obligations, kids. Is that a challenge you guys face? Is it something you are working on, getting completion rates up, getting people actually to get through their degrees?
I think that is a story that can be told at probably every 2-year institution across this country. I can give you some strategies about how we're dealing with that. The first way is, we have a pretty robust academic advising team for each student. I mean, we really spend a lot of time making sure we set those students up to succeed. And that's a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week job. It happens when the students are in school and when they're out of school. It goes all the way from the dean to the department chair to the program manager to the faculty to the adjuncts. I think everybody on campus, no matter what their position is hands-on students in some capacity. The other thing we're doing, and this is a new thing, is we created what I think is a transformational career service center in our institution. This career service center, and Alan McMillan, who's the architect of this thing, is sitting in the room. He's right here. This thing takes career services to a whole new level, whereby every student who touches that campus takes what we call a cornerstone class. Cornerstone was traditionally delivered to kind of teach students how to be successful in college. They flipped the thing upside down and really created this module-based process of learning how to be a student, learning how to really figure out what you want to do with your life, learning how to build a resume, learning how to market yourself, learning how to market your skills, learning how to dress, learning how to speak, learning how to apply for a job, learning how to get that job, sustain that job, all the way to being financially free. And I think, that's important in any 2-year institution. I think it's especially critical in the region that we're in. I know myself, I didn't have that in college. I certainly didn't have that in high school. And so I think that's another way we're really helping to help with retention and completion and things like that.
Let's open up the conversation to everybody up here, and then we're about to go to questions. I'm going to ask you, in 3 minutes, I'm going to ask you a practical question. And that practical question will be bits of advice you would give to other parts of the country on doing what's happened here on rural development, rural parts of the country, about what you learned and advice. But before I get to that practical question, what about I have a cultural question. We've been through other parts of Appalachia up and down, the region that calls itself Appalachia, and there's a distinct culture here that interacts with the economy and interacts with social life. We were in North Carolina and a woman said, you know, we fight with each other, but if you outsiders critique us, we'll kill you. That was basically. So I just want to reflect on the culture of this place, and it's sunk deep in the soil here, and just how it affects life here, how it affects resilience here. Start maybe, Leslie, with you.
Well, and I think what's really interesting, especially since we're sitting in the city of Athens, is this mix of cultures. So there's a lot of diversity. You know, there's people like me or Art who came to school here and then had to become entrepreneurs because we wanted to stay here. I mean, when I did my sort of bid as a back to the lander in the 70s and early 80s, I had to learn from my neighbors how really to live, you know, in Meigs County and raise animals and grow a garden. So there's sometimes a skepticism or a suspicion of outsiders. You know, I wasn't born and raised here. My grandparents' generation might be from the region, but I grew up in Cleveland like Art. So mixing this diversity is what I find pretty interesting. And I think the folks who have been on this land for generations are much more welcoming and interested in working with other folks all across the region. And I see that in our work throughout Central Appalachia. I think even those of us who represent sort of the different hats sitting here on the dais, you know, you have educational institutions, you have entrepreneurs, you have agencies, you have nonprofit support organizations. But what happens, I think, lodged within these traditions is the sense of connection and care. You know, I see compassion in this work day after day. And when I watch you on Friday nights talk about what's happening at a national level, I worry that there's maybe not that same level of compassion. So we've been doing that community building because that's part of our soul in this region. And I would say that that's true across many rural communities. And we just need to be better recognized because there's a lot of untold stories and a lot of unsung heroes doing this work. And we're so modest, we don't always tell our stories very well.
I mean, a very difficult nut to crack. You come here, you live here, you go to school here, and most people leave, okay? But then when you move here and you live here, and the more time you put in, the more that you're accepted and loved, and you've got brethren and community behind you. And the longer I'm here, and the more that opens, and then, you know, you go to Lowe's or you go somewhere else and you meet somebody for the first time, and they're ready to give you a hug because they've heard about the things you're doing for them, their neighbors, and everyone around you. And it's amazing because there's so many hardworking people with amazing skill sets, but they're modest and they don't tell you about it. But then once you get into it, you hear these things, and the next thing you know, you've got people on staff or friends who are doing these amazing things that you never thought would happen. But it's hard to get through and find that.
Yeah, you know, so admittedly, I don't live in the region. I actually live in Columbus because my wife has a pretty demanding job in Columbus when we moved here. I work in Southeast Ohio. She works in Columbus, so of course she doesn't want to commute every day, and you know I drew the short straw, but that's fine. But when I started working at Hawking, I had the opportunity to go back and get my master's degree, and I came to Ohio University and entered into their MBA program. And people would say to me, "What are you going to do when you get done with your MBA?" Because that drive every morning, I mean, it's a 2.5-hour drive. Well, you know, you made it this morning. Are you going to leave Hawking? And I would say, no. Why would I do that? The environment here is just. I mean, it's an amazing place. The people here are amazing, but I'll go back to the people in this room, the people who are on stage, getting to work with these people every day. You know, just decades of commitment to really changing the narrative in Appalachia. Getting to be around that every day, priceless. You can't put a price tag on that. So, yeah,
Okay,
my observation.
Let's go to the advice for other rural communities. Do you have any?
Well, I always have advice, David.
I thought you might.
Well, and I think what we've learned doing this work throughout Central Appalachia is you can't do this alone. You've got to get together with other folks. So we work with many other nonprofit organizations like Rural Action in our region and like many of our other educational partners to kind of figure it out. So don't do it alone. Figure out how to be a good network weaver, because I think that's the systems approach piece. And then always have the entrepreneurs in the forefront. We're here to benefit the entrepreneurs and serve their needs and figure out what their prioritizations are. And that's what I've always tried to lead with, and that's certainly the best advice I could give to any other partners doing rural development.
I'd like to say go for it. Okay? Do it. Like if you have a passion and something that you want to get into or a field that you know, you're like, I'm sick of this job and I want to do something different. Well, don't be afraid of doing it. I mean, maybe keep your day job. Maybe save a bunch of money to be ready for that. But keep making moves to go in that entrepreneurial direction, because if you know, if not, you're never going to do it. And the longer you wait, the harder it is to get into it. And like Leslie said, use your resources, use people around you, talk to everybody, see what programs are there, see what people are there, what skill sets are around, and go for it. Quit talking about it and do it.
I will say, once I asked my readers over 70 to talk about their lives and rate themselves for their lives, and about 5,000 people wrote in about what they had done with their life, and nobody, with one exception of those whole 5,000, everybody loved every risk they took. Nobody regretted a risk, except for one person. They went bankrupt. But the other people regretted the risk. And the best piece of advice, one of the best pieces of advice I got was get to yourself quickly. If you want to be an entrepreneur, just start doing it. Don't say, oh, I need this degree or this job or that job. Just get to yourself quickly. Sean, did you have any thoughts for other rural areas?
I just think you got to lead with your assets. You got to recognize what your regional assets are, and you got to lead with that. Agriculture, food systems have been a part of the narrative here forever, and so I think it's only natural that we continue to lead on that in our economic development strategies.
What role, obviously there are some public sector things here, but what role does government play? Federal, local, is it integrated into your systems? Is it something you're operating without? Is it helpful, harmful?
Looking at me, yeah, put Leslie on the spot. To me, it's measuring that political capital and identifying, you know, it's not just working with elected officials, but sometimes it's looking at how do policies need to change. You know, we want to redevelop Main Street in Middleport, Ohio. You know, are there some code issues that are restricting us from being able to do that? So I think getting any kind of influentials, whether they're electeds or whether they're policymakers, to the table so that they're designing what you want to do, that they have that sense of ownership and they're there to problem solve throughout the way, I think is pretty important.
I think having leaders that are not afraid to tell the story and that tell it often and tell it loudly, that draws, especially from a federal government aspect, that draws attention to your region, it helps. I know for myself and many of the people in this room, one of the federal initiatives that was a game changer for us in allowing us to really expand workforce development, economic development, was the Appalachian Regional Commission's Power Initiative. I mean, that really changed the game for us. And so the great thing about the Appalachian Regional Commission is, you know, they really do a great job of bringing people together, putting them in a room, and just, you know, establishing a comfortable environment for collaboration and people you wouldn't normally have the opportunity to do that with.
I'm going to ask you, then we'll go to the floor, just one final question, and that is to describe a moment like of true happiness in your job? Like when you thought this is awesome, because I go to a lot of two-year college commencements, and they're one of my favorite activities to go to, because the graduates can be 65, they can be 22, often they have big families blowing horns, and when you graduate, when you're wearing the gown, for the ladies, the only way you have to express yourself is through your footwear. And so I noticed that at two-year college commencements, a lot of women really express themselves with really radical shoes, which are like a statement. I always think that's a statement of power that I'm doing this. And people are so happy. So I don't know whether it's looking out at the pub, looking at the facility you have, just some moment when you thought, yeah, this is good.
There's moments daily. A few stick out, though, the day that we got the public house back after the fire, or the day we got the public house in the first place in 2009, or when the production facility opened, or when HR was like, we just got to 124 employees. I'm like, what? These are amazing moments, and what we're doing to support our community at that point, boggles your mind. And but one in particular, we're driving around self-distributing beer around the state of Ohio. We're not exactly in the center of Ohio to make it very easy logistically to get to the hotbeds in the cities where there's more people. And, we can handle this town pretty easily with our things and the fact that we're a mile away from our main clientele. But the day that the distributor pulled up for the first time and a semi docked at the door and we loaded it up and said, "C'est la vie." Okay? That was a great moment.
C'est la vie.
Well, I think everyone in this room knows that I am just got an abiding devotion to worker ownership. So I think what always makes me awesomely happy, and my fellow worker owners will laugh when they hear me say this, is our monthly member meetings, especially when new people want to become worker owners. This crazy idea that a bunch of unemployed restaurant workers could own a prosperous business and continue to build it over all these decades just makes me feel like, maybe I wasn't so crazy back in June of 1985.
Okay,
though I am.
Yeah. Let's go to the floor. A lot of people in this room are involved in a lot of this work. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear questions, and especially cutting ones.
Hi, I wanted to ask a little bit about the funding, because when you're talking about developing, and strengthening the network, there's a lot that goes into that infrastructure, the processing and distribution. And Art, you mentioned something about the importance of keeping the dollars local. How critical is it that the dollars start out local, that the investment in getting the system built out comes from local investment, local money?
Well, I've gotten 2 SBA loans along the way, okay, to both start at Bagel Street and then for the initial loan for the brew pub. And the banks wouldn't talk to me forever. Okay, as the economy crashed and restaurants failed miserably all over the place, and the bank most banks laughed me out of the room. No thanks, see you later. SBA is your best bet, SBA is your best bet. But that's no longer the case. There's actually banks harassing me to steal me away from our local bank where I can walk in and go talk to the president, and that's amazing because we work with our local bank. And maybe it's not the best interest rate, but I can walk in and get something done that day that I need. Like I need a line of credit. We got this piece of equipment that we really want to make a move on, and they want money today, and typically I can get that. So the beauty of going with that local bank has been pretty awesome. But SBA is also awesome for starting things out. And I said just do it. Well, that's a great place to start because it's funded and there and available, and they're not going to give you too much, but they want to make sure that you're investing in said business as well to kind of support you in that endeavor. Did that answer your question?
Is there another?
I think Leslie was going to comment on the funding structure too.
And thanks for your question, Brian. I think, 2 things. I think for startup entrepreneurs, we're seeing more crowdsourcing opportunities be a good way for folks to get started because there is so much goodwill and such willingness, even at a small level, for local folks to invest in startups. And ditto, Art, we've used community revolving loan funds, other programs like the SBA guaranteed loans. USDA has some great programs as well. And then I think, looking at some of the opportunities even to create more energy efficiency or renewable energy in your business operations, the REAP program, which Art has used, and I believe many of our other small businesses and craft breweries have used locally as well.
Are there foundations in the area that have been helpful?
Yes, we've had great relationships with our family and community foundations. Often their early investment in our work helps us leverage additional public funding. And I think just provides also that validity that, yes, this is something that's important to the region, and we're putting skin in the game, and you should too.
That, Leslie, are there gaps that the philanthropic investment fills that the private sector or the government can't fill? What kind of things is philanthropy doing that others are not?
I think what we found, and I'll give an example close to home, the Osteopathic Heritage Foundation, they have a program for Nelsonville. They've been able to take some risks, I think, in terms of long-term funding around healthy food access. So they've invested in the collaborative partnership, both for planning, implementation of programs, and actual capital investment in facilities like Ace Nuts, food hubs, or the Chester Hill Produce Auction. And without that funding, we probably would not have been as able to leverage some of the other public federal programs.
Here up front.
And before you say this, if you are live streaming, please use hashtag Rural Innovation to send us your questions.
Hi. So I wanted to ask about, with all the corporate restaurants on East State Street and even on Court Street, with much cheaper options, how you build customer and brand loyalty, especially in an area that you talked about is entrenched in poverty. So how do you have loyalty there?
Be better. Be local, be here, be supportive. I mean, how many events who do I rip on? How many of those restaurants on East State Street are supporting our local events? I mean, I need to stop there.
Yeah, I mean, we buy T-shirts for the local softball team. We invest in artists by allowing them to have gallery space on our walls and for them to be able to make sales. And then I think, local is cool now these days. So just creating spaces where people can come together and hang out, and as Art and Sean have both said, have that sense of community. That's what sets us apart. So yes, you perhaps could go to one more chain restaurant in the soulless suburbs of any community across the U.S., even in rural places. But is that, it maybe is feeding you, but is it feeding you in other ways? Is it really giving you that sense of connection and community? And that's what local ownership and local control offers.
I think, too, just having great product. I mean, Jackie O's has great product. And it's consistently great. You're going to get a great product every time you walk through that door. So you'll make the move to Jackie O's as opposed to something else. There's something else I want to say about Jackie O's. It's one of the reasons why we started this fermentation science program is because it's no secret that the craft beverage sector is booming and expanding rapidly nationwide. And we see a huge opportunity, particularly in rural communities, where rural communities have really banded together around the one local craft brewery that popped up. It created vibrancy in the community. It created a sense of community ownership almost over that product. And that's very powerful when we're talking about building rural communities. And that is what Jackie O's has done for Athens. And that's another reason why people will choose to go to Jackie O's over going to a chain restaurant.
Back there.
Okay, I think for those people who are online, they don't know about CASA and worker-owned businesses, and I thought it's such a good story that most of us know pretty much about, but I'd really like to have you talk about that. Leslie.
Great. So when ACENET first got started back in 1985, it was at the same period of time that I and a number of other folks were going to become unemployed because the sole proprietorship business was failing. And what we were able to really harness, I think, at that point in time is have an organization that was focused on cooperative development, that was training people on worker ownership as an economic option. At the same time, many of us were in a state of, oh my God, what are we going to do? We're going to be out of a job. So whether we had complete, buy-in to the sense that worker ownership was going to be our salvation, it was something that I think we were ready to do as risk takers. And what we have found over the years is, again, the Worker-Owned Restaurant Corporation, people in Athens and really across the region know us as Casa Nueva and Casa Nueva Cantina, have been able to grow that business. And even if people don't always know that we're worker-owned, they know that it's a special place because of that sense of connection and community. Whether you're looking at all the farmers that we buy from to make up our menu items, whether it's sourcing local craft beverages that we have on tap and available both in the cantina and the dining rooms, it tells, I think, the story that local control really makes a difference. And why I continue to be such a fan of worker ownership is that for many folks, a lot of folks on the economic margins, you would never be able to do this by yourself. But when you become part of a larger cooperative business, you're still investing, certainly a lot of sweat equity, but maybe a modest member fee as well. And you're reaping the benefits of that business. So I always like to brag about CASA. This is 33 years, still of a pretty glorious experiment, but we've become an institution in this community. And not only have we lifted the salaries and the benefits of our staff, we've also created, I think, a lot of economic opportunities from the small businesses that we buy from. And certainly as a community hub, I think we create an environment by which more people can dream, more entrepreneurs can aspire, more worker owners can leave and go off and start their own businesses.
Could I just ask you exactly how it works? Where does the revenue go if you have a downtime in 2008 or whatever? What happens?
Well, we've shown a profit every year, 33 years in a row. So I think that's pretty remarkable. Some years a little bit better than other years. So we're making decisions as to, can we give ourselves a raise?
Do we want to have? Is the whole board?
Yes, it's very bureaucratic. I mean, democracy is time consuming. And not always that tidy. So yes, we have monthly member meetings. All these regular customers are like, oh no, they're closed. It's a Tuesday. All our neighboring food businesses love that we're closed, though. Weekly board of directors meetings. So it's still a regular corporation. It's just the workers are the shareholders and the profit takers.
There's some over here.
Over here.
Thanks. I know this forum is mostly for a certain tier of the food economy, but I wonder if you all have an idea of what role you may see your organizations in some of the difficulties that the people on the ground, the farmers, the local orchard, who's had impact from the extractive industry in the region. I know one of the orchards that you may have purchased your fruit from is in the county where a large ethane storage facility is planned. So there's a lot of impact that at this level you may not know about, but the people that you rely on are at risk. So I wonder if you have an idea of how you may be able to help kind of strengthen their businesses through your work.
Thanks, Christine. So I think we are oftentimes, as buyers, aware of the issues that our farmers and processors are dealing with. I think wearing my more community-based economic development hat, I think it's talking to elected officials and other decision makers that these natural assets, especially these assets that have really created this ever-growing food economy in the region, could be put at risk. So how do you balance some of the other, I would say, desires by other constituencies to see some sectors grow at the detriment of others? And that's, I would say, how we need to get the story out, is here's our successes, let's not put this at risk.
Yeah, I would just second that. We are, as you know, as someone who works at a community college, we are aware of that as well, for a number of reasons. First of all, we always are looking at and collecting information about companies that are moving in and opportunities for jobs, really just opportunities for jobs for students. So looking at it from that standpoint. So we're pretty much aware of that, and we try to start with the community first and try to gauge the community's response to what's going on in any situation. And then, like Leslie said, you know, I mean, we a lot of times have an opportunity to speak to community leaders, legislators, and we try to be advocates for the community. Might not always work, but we try.
I've got a question that came in over Twitter asking, you know, what are some of the toughest challenges each of you have faced in sort of like making what you're doing a success, and how did you address it?
The best part and the most difficult part of running a business are the people. Okay? Everyone's great, okay? And you get support from everybody, but I'm not a psychiatrist, okay? But I feel like I may be a practicing one. I could probably teach some courses on that sort of stuff, either as a bartender and or a boss. However, it's the best part of the thing too. Like the joys that employees or people that around you have, it's amazing, and you get all these great things. But it also, you know, comes with its ups and downs, and it becomes wonderful, and it becomes difficult, all in the same boat.
I think I'm going to go back to a little bit of Christine's question. I think the challenge sometimes, especially for ACENET, is we're doing economic development differently. And we're not just looking at maybe the typical job creation, job retention, business start, business expansion impacts. We're looking at the whole social fabric of the community. And that's where it gets challenging, is how do you get folks on the same page? And it might be, for us, I think, as hopeful catalyzers of collaboration, sometimes there's a lot of what I refer to as creative abrasion, because people are looking at things differently. You know, they're looking at job creation maybe from extraction industries, and we're looking at job and local ownership and sort of a different measure of cultural and natural assets that some of our other economic development partners are not. So where do we meet? You know, how do we work together to, again, lift the needs of the people and places, many of them underserved in our region? So getting folks on the same page, I guess it goes back to people again, are the biggest challenges.
Growth is also a really difficult thing. As you grow, it's like chaotic. And, you know, as a fermentation sciences program, or all these different universities are coming on with programs that I really could have used 4 years ago. Okay, so keeping up with what's current versus what's going to be current is a very difficult
So,
thing.
so the ivory tower or ivy tower, what are we calling this, is lagging the business development. That's what
Yeah,
you're saying.
I would love to have
But they're
hired-
catching up. They're catching up, right?
They're trying to catch up, but then also we're in a period where the at least the craft beer sector is not in these rapid periods of growth. We're down to 6 or 8% growth from these 30, 50, 30 years in there, and you know, that's going to be a little difficult for a number of companies out there.
I just ask about one theme. You mentioned the agriculture industry, and then several times the extraction industry has come up. Are these two rival visions of how this community is going to develop, or are they intertwining?
There's definitely tension. I mean, and it's part of our history too. We've had these boom and bust cycles with extraction industries. And again, and I can only say from AceNet's point of view, you know, we want inclusion. We're focused on local ownership and local control. So we're usually paying attention to the sectors that emphasize those values. And that's what we try and do, is create the infrastructure, the services, the partnerships that build those sectors.
Yeah. I have a question, and I think you partly already answered this, but I wanted to ask it anyways. So how much of what you do you think is the success and like the model that you use is endemic to Athens and this area, and how much do you think it can be generalized and exported to other areas?
Well, I spend more time out of Athens and even out of Ohio probably than I spend in Athens. So I think we're looking at some of the patterns, some of the models of success in southeastern Ohio, in much of the work that the nonprofit and other partners have done, and figured out how to customize that or replicate it in other places. Again, people say, oh, Athens, you have Ohio University, you have Hocking College, you have these wonderful assets. But if you go into any community, there are assets. A great story, and Sean can chime in, New Straitsville in southern Perry County, population I think it's 711 people in 2016. 2 decades ago, there were a group of women who started the small, Southern Perry Incubation Center for Entrepreneurs, or SPICE. AceNet has worked with them, I would say, 18 years. They provide a lot of technical assistance, classes, all sorts of support, even from microenterprise loans to aspiring entrepreneurs in their community. Hocking College just has purchased a distillery, also headquartered in New Straitsville, Heritage Tourism, the moonshine capital. So even in small places, if you do an inventory of what your assets are, you can figure out where you need to go. And I think it doesn't matter if it's in a college town or if it's in a smaller rural place, village or township, you can figure some of these same approaches and apply them to make a difference in your community.
I couldn't say it any better than that. Perfect.
Gosh, I'll try and do this. I'm very nervous. So I'm a grower. I'm a farmer. And we've had as many as 14 people working for us. We have many fewer now. And I'm at the farmers market every week. And I see all the 80 vendors there that are there. And I look at their ages, and they're mostly my age or in their 40s. We've got a few that are younger. And as you look at this opportunity to make local foods a driving force for a rural economy, given the prices that people are willing to pay for their food, how can you as rural developers make it possible for these young farmers, these young entrepreneurs who want to make their living off the land, able to afford to buy that land at the price that they're able to get the food, at the price that they're able to produce that food and still make a living. We're in a good position, my husband and I, but young people, nobody can afford to buy our farm and farm it. I mean, we could sell our farm to deer hunters who would then lock off the land to anybody else doing it, but how can we pass on this investment and this installation that we've built, and I'm sure other farmers are looking, who are our age, are looking at the same thing. How are we going to be able to keep this farmland, have it be productive and be able to continue to provide this local food for this community?
So the question was asked by Becky Rondi of Green Edge Organic Gardens. Again, one of the unsung heroes probably of our local food system. And I think, you know, Beck, we know this is a challenge not just here in Appalachia, Ohio, but throughout rural America. Some of the things that I think we're seeing regionally with farm incubation programs has maybe some promise. I think there are also new loan and farm link models that might be applicable too for farmers to be able to come up with a succession plan and help younger beginning farmers transition to their properties. So not happening fast enough, and I think whether it's national organizations or even statewide organizations in Ohio, like the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association, we need to think about this stuff, and it's definitely a challenge that I think you've explained, you know, very articulately, and we need to get on it.
And we'll wrap up with that question, but I think it's actually, that question provides a great opportunity to talk about the importance of sessions like this. So we are talking here about an amazing local food economy, and one of the characteristics of rural America is we have tremendous entrepreneurs working on the problems in their community around the country, but they're often not connected to each other. So, for instance, in southwestern Minnesota, there's an amazing program run by an organization called Southwestern Initiative Foundation, where they work with existing farmers in order to preserve farmland and pass it on to new generations. So we can, from opportunities like the America's Rural Opportunity Series, begin to learn from each other and share what's working in another rural place to address the problems in a rural place like this that's doing such amazing work that's being adopted by other communities. At the early on in the program, David asked about metrics. You know, how do you measure this? How do you know that it's all working? And actually, before we started, when we were back in the green room, he asked about the impact on the local economy. Art talked a little bit about how he's really endeavors to keep more money in the region, and Leslie talked about the concept of value chain. And I'd like to wrap up by talking a little bit about maybe the less than evident impact this has compared to perhaps going to your grocery store and buying a package of lettuce that was produced in Mexico that you pay a few cents less for. That package of lettuce was probably produced by a relatively poor farmer, not paid very much for their labor, and along the way to your grocery store where you spend several dollars for it, most of what you're paying for is the packaging, the transportation, the refrigeration, the energy that goes into trucking it here. And then the grocery store sells it, they make 2%. And if it's a large corporate grocery chain, that 2% goes to shareholders outside of the region. So ultimately, the major impact on your regional economy from buying that lettuce that was produced in Mexico is going to be the wages paid to the people working in the grocery store and the property taxes paid on the building. If, on the other hand, you buy lettuce that's produced by a local farmer, you may pay a few cents more for that lettuce, but virtually 100% of that purchase price gets plowed right back into the local economy. It goes to the people in the economy who sell services to that farmer. It goes to the people who help truck that, into your local grocery store. It goes back into meeting the expenses of that farm family, and then that turns over again and again in the local economy. So when you begin to think about these local food systems, it's not just, is it fresh, is it local, is it healthy, but it's also the fact that almost everything you pay for that local food gets plowed back into your economy, goes into the pockets of your neighbors, and it's a very efficient system. That really reduces many of the kinds of impacts that our global society has, like the large energy expenditures to move lettuce from Mexico to Athens. So this has really been an amazing set of 3 stories. And there's really one thing that you can definitely draw from all 3, and that it's not about one person's story. It's about community coming together with a vision, a willingness to take risks, and every one of our presenters discussed the role of others and how the support of the community and the support of others matters in their work. So building a regional food system or any other effort to capture more wealth from a rural region's assets really requires the kind of value chain that Leslie talked about. People coming together and individually plugging the various niches required to make that product, move it to market, process it, deliver it, and ultimately consume it. It's an ecosystem, and it takes a while for it to build, but it starts with the vision and the entrepreneurial spirit like what we see on the stage today. So please join with me today in thanking our panelists, our moderator, and Aspen Institute's Community Strategy Group for sponsoring this Rural Development Innovators Group, America's Rural Opportunity session. Thanks very much.
And just a couple closing things. I also want to thank you all for coming today, both in the room and live streamers. Thank you to David, to Leslie, to Art, and to Sean. I want to thank you to our host where we held this, Ohio University, which as a person from Michigan, I know is the university in Ohio, right? And I always like to close by saying that we know that a healthy and more prosperous America requires a healthy and prosperous rural America. And that won't happen until we start investing more and accelerating the kind of innovation that you've seen here today. So please stay tuned for our next America's Rural Opportunity Dialogue. Watch your emails. We'll be sending that out. And for now, enjoy the onset of autumn and invest in rural America. Thank you very much.
Just going to be a little bit of people getting up and walking around. And I'm going to go ahead and kill the stream.